Welcome, brave listeners, to another frightening tale, presented by yours truly, Wilhelm. Tune in each week where I entertain my listeners with another dark tale of the paranormal, donated by authors from around the world. If you're an author of some paranormal fiction and would like to share a story with my listeners, submit one at frighteningtales.com. And while you're there, tune in for more than 30 hours of previous content. Today's tale was written by Mark Wilhelm, a Canadian writer, artist, designer, and voiceover actor. I wrote this story for my family, who wondered what it was that I had drawn all those years ago. I kept hinting that one day I'd tell them, so here that day has finally come. Without further delay, I present to you now The Bump. My parents may never admit this, but we all knew there was something about the spare room my family renovated out of the attic that just did not sit right with any of us. There was a feeling you got even looking at the doorway to the room. Your core just said, avoid at all costs. And more or less, we did. Like many families, as generations age, traveling becomes more of an ordeal. Mom wanted a space for Grandpa to stay whenever he did make it all the way out here. The long drive often meant he just couldn't come, and Mom's job in the city meant we couldn't live closer to Grandpa. So last summer, Mom and Dad agreed to convert the attic into another room that Grandpa could stay in while he's here. I wondered if eventually he'd move in, but Mom and Dad wouldn't give me a straight answer on the matter. The attic was a large room that expanded to every side of the house. It had sloped walls near the ceiling and windows on 3 of the 4 sides. The hall closet was demoed to make way for the stairs up to the space. Complications with utilities in the walls meant the stairs were fairly wide, and this meant there wasn't a door on the room, which is my initial reason for not wanting the space for myself. I didn't need a nosy mom popping her head up the stairs whenever she wanted to see what I was up to. During the renovations, Mom and Dad had the house wide open, moving supplies in and out. It was one of those early nights sitting around the table eating pizza because everyone was too tired to cook. We heard a bump from upstairs. Dad joked that the cat or a raccoon must have wandered in an unobserved open door. I remember the look Mom flashed him that said, "You better go check that it isn't, or I'm not sleeping tonight." And the way Dad's shoulders dropped said he understood, and he made his way up to check. He never did find anything. The next few days, we would hear the odd bump from upstairs, like someone was moving up there. It was clear as day, but we were all together in the main room, completely focused on our media. Mom crocheted while watching TV with Dad, and I gamed on my tablet. Bump. We stopped and looked up at the ceiling. "What was that?" Mom asked. Dad and I looked at one another with the same loss of an answer. "I'll go take a look," said my dad, getting off the couch with a tired groan. He returned a short time later with a bowl of chips and a report that there was nothing up there. It didn't take long before we just figured that with the new renovations, something must have changed in the house. That meant it needed to settle again. Houses always seemed to need to settle, whatever that meant. I asked my dad one night what happens when a house settles. He told me that when houses are made of wood and wood absorbs moisture and heat, it expands and contracts. And when all that weight starts to do that together, you get sounds. It's perfectly normal and a sign of a rather healthy home. And that was that. There were times on my way to bed that I stopped, as if caught in the gaze of something up the stairs in the shadows of the spare room. Because of the windows, shadows danced all across that room when the moon shone or a car's headlights passed by. And I rationally knew there was nothing up there, but my irrational mind wasn't buying it, not for a moment, and hurried me to my room. One night in the early hours, I could have sworn I heard my dresser bump against the wall. It pulled me out of a rather bad dream at the time, so I didn't mind. But the relief at coming out of that nightmare was replaced by the reality of another. My door was open, and something big was in my room, the size of a bear, and was currently sniffing in my closet. Its size made it difficult to not bump into things in my room. The old phrase, "bull in a china shop," came to mind. I lifted my head slowly, looking down my body at the darkness that eclipsed the closet. I could tell it was moving because the wall across from the foot of my bed kept coming back into view. And then it happened. That ill-timed tickle at the back of your throat that wanted you to clear it. It started as a low signal, the slightest tickle, an irritation that seemed to intensify the more I tried to ignore it. My eyes were watering now. It stood up on its hind legs and started to sniff up the wall, intently looking for something. Was it me? I tried with all my might to just swallow saliva and soothe my throat, but it built and built, till finally I coughed. The great head of the thing whipped around to face me. It was round and flat, more like a giant black pug. Its eyes, spaced to the edge of its visage, where circles of white light glowed like small saucer-sized moons. Then its face seemed to bifurcate, nearly splitting in half from side to side as its great mouth parted, the corners of which ran up past the edges of its eyes. Then, right before my eyes, it faded into the room like a giant Cheshire cat, from the edges of its form up to the face. I couldn't see it, but it lurched forward, almost panicked that I was looking at it, and bashed against my bed with such force it knocked me back against the wall in a ball of pillows and blankets, and then bounded out of my room. I could hear it thumping in the hall and then again downstairs, and then nothing. The house was eerily quiet. I moved to the edge of the mattress, staring along my bed across the room and out the door. The hallway was dark and still. Standing, I stole across my room to close the door. Peering into the hall, I scanned the stairwell that led to the main floor, to my parents' room and the office, but those doors were closed. Then my eyes moved up the stairs into the attic space, where a dark shape standing in the doorway seemed to move ever so subtly, which startled me, and I closed the door with deft efficiency, traversed the expanse of floor to my bed, and buried myself in the blankets and pillows there till I stirred in the sunlight of the next day. Mom and Dad were unusually irritable the following day. Not sure what set them off, but I had decided in their current state I'd not bring up the thing in my room last night. I couldn't help but feel that they would not be overly receptive to it. They'd chalk it up to childish imagination or something. The days that followed saw that dark mood grow over the house, along with the incidents of mystery bumps from seemingly empty rooms. On another occasion, Mom was furious with my father for leaving not one but nearly every door in the kitchen open. He denied it and said he was out in the garage, but Mom didn't seem to want to accept his side of the story, and after nearly reaching screaming levels, Dad slammed the door and returned to the garage. I think he slept in the loft out there that night because I don't recall him coming back into the house. In the time that followed my initial sighting of that dark thing, my parents had become nearly unrecognizable from their former selves, and stress in the house was at an all-time high. Every little thing between the two of them seemed to ignite into discourse in a matter of moments. I will admit I didn't even want to stay there, and anytime I ever found myself away from the house for any duration, it made me dread the returning. Another day had ended, and I made myself a microwave meal that tasted as gray as the house felt. I sat alone at the dining room table, Mom in the rec room and Dad out in the garage. There was a pile of dishes in the sink that I'd get to after I finished eating, if only to remove another thing my parents could fight over. But for now, I stared at my phone while slowly eating something that resembled a magma flow of tomato sauce and cheese in a tiny bread shell. Bump. I looked up from the dinette table, illuminated by a single tasteful low-hung light, and looked across the kitchen dining room into the dark living room. The curtains were open, but it was dark outside now, and the streetlights made the sheer drapes seem almost silver. I looked from left to right. Nothing. I looked down and blew on another bite of gray. Bump. My attention snapped back to the living room. Again, I scanned from left to right. Nothing. However, this time, when I tipped my head down, I kept my eyes locked on the living room. At first, still nothing. And then, something. Low, behind the couch, slipped past into the black that framed the window. In that dark place midway up the wall, 2 lines of white light expanded into saucer-sized discs. I dropped my fork and bolted for the stairs, where I stopped, ready to run for my room. I stared into the dining room where I had been eating. I stared so hard, so diligently at the dining room, waiting for a sign of it, waiting for validation that this was real. For whatever reason that held no logic, I needed to see, to understand what this was that hunted me in my home. Time felt so painfully slow. Finally, a black, paw-shaped thing swept across my plate. It was quick and deliberate. Then I flinched at a short, sudden spray of something wet, spat across the low cupboard doors and the floor on the other side of the island. It suddenly felt very cold along my shoulders, and a chill went down my spine. my eyes locked on the space between the cupboards and the island. First one paw, then another pulled the great black shape forward, till it filled the space. With narrowed eyes, it sniffed at the wet goo, first on the floor and then at the cupboards. It made no sound, till its side bumped into the island, and when it did, the only sound came from it pushing around the objects in the space. The sound of the interaction revealed an idea of the weight and strength of the beast, as it caused the island to creak and flex from where it was fastened to the floor. The thing itself seemed to offer no sound. Its head swung to face me, eyes narrowed to slits, head low, as a hunting animal might do. One paw slowly placed in front of the other, step by careful step closer. I noticed the claws now. How could I have not seen those claws? They were so long and sharp. Its skin or fur was hard to look at. It seemed to have a movement to it, like static. It was so hard to describe. It was as though it was unstable. It didn't want to be any one thing, so it kept shifting. One moment like fur, the next like wisps of smoke, and then like scribbles of lines in the air. It was easiest to focus on at its center where it was densest, and it was getting closer. Its great mouth tore a line across the darkness of its face as it parted, revealing so many thin blades of teeth in that massive mouth. How could any beast need so many teeth? The air around me was now so cold it stung. I could see my breath. The skin on my shoulders and back seemed to burn. And a sense of sadness and helplessness fell over me. Mustering all my will, I rolled onto my stomach and faced up the stairs, pushing my legs with all my might. And to my horror, there behind me stood a figure, standing in a dark fog that trickled down from the attic. Black tendrils snaked out from its outstretched arms and into my back, where I could feel them hooked into my skin. My sudden burst of movement stalled and was now all but void of initiative. Then, as suddenly as it startled me, the hooks tore free as the figure drew its arms up and back, defensively withdrawing several steps back to the attic. But it was too late. From behind me lunged the great beast, landing on the figure, which seemed to scream a squeal of unearthly horror, its great mouth gnashing and biting. The figure flailed helplessly, its dark tendrils lashing out desperately, till finally the beast had devoured it right down to a final long noodle slurp of the fog that led from the attic. All signs of it were gone. It turned and looked at me and seemed pleased with itself. The door to the garage opened and I heard Dad come in. He sounded upset, but not angry. "Honey?" He hurried through the door and went to the basement. I quickly looked back at the thing beside me, only to get knocked aside as it leapt down the stairs and out the door my dad left open. I could hear crying and fussing coming from the basement, parts of what sounded like apologies and professions of love. In the days that followed, my parents seemed closer than ever. We started to have our evenings together in the rec room again, and dinners at the table. Dad stopped sleeping in the loft in the garage that was only ever meant for storage. I eventually did move up into the attic, which no longer felt uncomfortable. Dad and I built a sliding barn door for privacy, and Grandpa enjoyed sleeping in my old room last week when he managed to visit. None of us can remember the last time we heard the house settling. The incident has forever changed me. I find now that I can't help but keep the outside doors shut whenever possible, with a compulsion that can seem irrational at times. It's just, you never know what might wander into your home when no one's watching.
Thank you, brave listeners, for joining me on another dark story. I urge my listeners to go out and find more content by our weekly authors, if you're not too timid. If you enjoyed today's episode, please click the like button. And if you don't want to miss a future story, then click the subscribe button. Tune in next week for another frightening tale, if you're brave enough.